The Antiquity of Egypt versus Al-Fustat, bridging 3,500 years of history. Slide 1, the timeline gap core concept. Al-Fustat is a medieval foundation, while Egypt's capital history began 3 millennia earlier. Ancient Egypt, Pharaonic era, began roughly 3100 BCE with the unification of the two lands. Persian-Roman era. The strategic importance of the site was recognized by 500 BCE. Al-Fustat, Islamic era, founded in 641-642 CE. The reality. By the time the first tent was pitched at Al-Fustat, the site of Memphis was already older than Al-Fustat is to us today. Slide 2. Memphis. The first capital core concept. Long before Cairo existed on the East Bank, Memphis was the heart of Egypt on the West Bank. Founder. Pharaoh Menes, the first king of a unified Egypt. The site, Khan at the apex of the delta where Upper and Lower Egypt meet, near modern Mit Rahina. Defense strategy. Built on the west bank of the Nile to use the river as a natural barrier against eastern invaders. Longevity. Memphis remained either the capital or the second most important city for thousands of years. Slide 3. Engineering the Nile. Core concept. The very ground where the Cairo region sits was reshaped by pharaonic engineering. The Great Diversion. Pharaoh Menes conducted a huge operation to move the Nile. The canal. The river originally ran close to the Libyan Western Mountains. It was diverted into a central canal between the eastern and western ridges. Reclaiming land. The original riverbed was filled in to create the flat ground required for a city of grand proportions. Slide 4, the move to the east, 500 BCE, 27 CE. Core concept. Before the Arabs arrived, Persians and Romans established the Babylon anchor. The vulnerability of Memphis. As the Nile's course changed and islands like Rhoda emerged, Memphis became easier to attack from the east. Persian fortress, shot out of 500 BCE, the Persians recognized the strategic value of the East Bank and built the first fortress of Babylon on the heights of Al-Rasad. Roman fortress, 227 CE. The Romans succeeded the Persians, rebuilding the fortress that would eventually become the nucleus for Al-Fustat. Slide 5. Al-Fustat. The new layer, 641 CE core. Concept. Al-Fustat was not built on a wasteland, but around the existing Roman Byzantine ruins. The conquest. Amr ibn al-As captured the Roman fortress of Babylon in 641 CE. Foundation. He established a garrison town called Al-Fustat, meaning the tent, just north and east of the fortress. Evolution. 942 CE. Foundation of the Mosque of Amr. Strategic choice chosen for easy communication with the Islamic State in Arabia, rather than the coastal Alexandria. The Islamic growth. While Al-Fustat grew rapidly into a compact city, it was essentially the newest addition to a 3,500-year-old strategic location. To understand the history of Egypt, one must view Al-Fustat not as the beginning, but as a relatively recent chapter in a story that had already been unfolding for over 3.5 millennia. While Al-Fustat was established in 641 to 642 CE, the foundational state of Egypt began around 3100 BCE with the unification of the two lands by Pharaoh Menes. By the time Amr ibn al-As pitched his famous tent to mark the new Islamic capital, the pyramids were already ancient monuments, and the city of Memphis had served as a global center of power for longer than the entire duration of the Islamic era to the present day. This massive chronological gap, nearly 3,700 years, highlights that Egypt was a mature sophisticated empire before the first stone of Al-Fustat was ever laid. The very land upon which Al-Fustat was built was not a natural occurrence, but the result of monumental pharaonic engineering that preceded the city by thousands of years. According to historical accounts, Pharaoh Menes undertook a huge operation to divert the course of the Nile, which originally flowed close to the western mountains. By conducting the river into a central canal and filling the original bed, the Egyptians reclaimed the flattened ground that would eventually host the Roman fortress and the Arab garrison. This transformation of the physical landscape demonstrates that the site's urban potential was recognized and unlocked by pharaonic town planners who operated in a world thousands of years removed from the medieval Arab conquerors. Furthermore, the strategic importance of the Cairo region was solidified by successive empires long before the Islamic conquest. Around 500 BCE, over 1,000 years before Al-Fustat, the Persians recognized the vulnerability of Memphis and shifted focus to the east bank of the Nile. They established the first fortress of Babylon on the heights of Al-Rasad to command the apex of the delta. This site was later reinforced by the Romans in chapter 7 BCE, who built the massive towers of Qasr ash-Sham. When the Arab forces arrived in the 7th century, they were not settling a wilderness. They were occupying a strategic node that had been fortified, contested, and inhabited by world-class empires for over a millennium. Ultimately, the founding of Al-Fustat represents a shift in administrative center rather than the birth of a nation. The provided texts emphasize that Al-Fustat grew around the pre-Islamic nucleus of the Roman fortress, essentially grafting a new medieval Arab identity onto a deeply rooted Greco-Roman and pharaonic palimpsest. The city's rapid expansion toward the Muqattam Hills and its dependence on the Nile's changing course were continuations of geographic struggles that Egyptian rulers had navigated since the Bronze Age. To study Al-Fustat is to study the medieval top layer of a civilization whose political, engineering, and strategic foundations were laid in the distant mists of the 4th millennium BCE. This comparison highlights the vast evolution of Egyptian governance, from the centralized god-king authority of the pharaonic era to the tribal, garrison-based administration of early Islamic Egypt. While the strategic location remained constant, the methods of control and urban organization changed significantly over 3,500 years. Comparative overview: Memphis versus Al-Fustat. Feature: Memphis, pharaonic administration. Al-Fustat, early Arab administration. Era of foundation: 100 BCE, early dynastic period. Islam conquest. Primary location: west bank of the Nile, east bank of the Nile. Administrative center: the royal palace of the pharaoh, the White Walls. The Mosque of Amr served as council chamber, law court, and treasury. Urban layout: grand centralized planning, monumental limestone temples and royal districts, garrison-style, mizr, scattered quarters based on tribal affiliations, kitat. Security strategy: protected by the river to the east. Focus on land reclamation and Nile diversion. Built around the pre-existing Roman fortress of Babylon, protected by the Muqattam Hills. Logistics and water, dependent on the diverted Nile stream and seasonal flooding for agriculture. Dependent on the Khalig Canal and the Nile's proximity for drinking water and transport. Demographics: homogeneous Egyptian population governed by a rigid religious hierarchy. Heterogeneous Arab tribes, nomadic background, alongside the indigenous Coptic population. core documentation, hieroglyphic inscriptions, royal decrees on stone and papyri. The oral traditions documented later via isnad, chains of transmission, and early written treatises. The strategic continuity, despite the millennia separating these two capitals, the strategic motives remain almost identical. Both administrations were obsessed with the apex of the delta. Both cities were placed precisely where the Nile Valley opens into the delta, ensuring control over all trade and movement between Upper and Lower Egypt. Hydraulic engineering. Pharaoh Menes diverted the river to create Memphis. Amr ibn al-Az and later governors were preoccupied with the Nile's changing course, which dictated where Al-Fustat could safely expand. The heights of Al-Rasad. While the pharaohs focused on the West Bank, later empires, Persian, Roman, and Arab, all utilized the eastern spur of the Mokattam Hills to oversee the river crossing.
Yo, I'm Mr. Nobody, and if you're still watching, you already know what to do. Smash that subscribe, drop a like, and stay grinning. Oh, and while you're at it, hit the comments. Let me know what's next. Step back in the timeline, 3 millennia deep, before the world was awake, while the ancestors sleep. 3100 BC, marked the date on the stone. Pharaoh Menes unified the lands, claimed the throne. He looked at the Nile, said the current gotta move. A huge operation just to get in the groove. He diverted the river, pushed the water aside, reclaimed the flat ground where the giants reside. On the west bank, Memphis rose up from the clay, white walls standing tall, holding rivals at bay. The heart of the delta, where the north meets the south. History speaking truth through a pharaonic mouth. By the time the first 10 hit the dirt in the east, Memphis already saw 3,000 years at the feast. It's the blueprint of power, the engineering plan before the new world ever started to scan. Bridge the gap, 3,500 years of the flow, from the pharaonic ground to the garrison's glow. Memphis was the root, Al-Fustat the new leaf, a story written deep, beyond common belief. At the apex of the delta where the river divides, power shifts its weight, but the strategy resides. It's the balance, it's the empires, layers in the dust, from the monuments of stone to the iron in the rust. The shift to the Babylon heights, time marched on and the river changed its course. The West Bank felt the pressure of a shifting force. 500 BCE, the Persians saw the sight, built a fortress on the east to command the light. On the heights of our side, they anchored the ground, watching every single boat that was delta bound. Then the Romans stepped in, 27 BCE, cause of Asham rising up for the world to see. They called it Babylon, a nucleus of might, holding down a crossing through the heat of the night. Memphis started fading as the islands emerged, while the strategic value of the East Bank surged. It wasn't just a wasteland, wasn't empty or bare, when the banners of the past were still hanging in the air. A millennium of conflict, a millennium of walls, waiting for the moment when the next empire calls. Bridge the gap, 3,500 years in the flow, on the pharaonic ground to the garrison's glow. Memphis was the root, Al-Fustat the new leaf, a story written deep, beyond common belief. At the apex of the delta where the river divides, power shifts its weight, 641, Amr ibn Al-As arrived at the gates of the fortress where the Romans survived. He didn't want the coast, kept it close to the sand. Communication lines back to the Arab land. He pitched a tent, Al-Fustat, near the Roman debris, grafting Islamic roots onto ancient history. The Mosque of Amr rose, not just a place for the prayer, but a treasury and court with a legislative flair. From the tribal Kiddat to the Muqaddam Hill, the city grew fast with a conqueror's will. But don't get it twisted, don't mistake the start. This was the newest chapter of a veteran heart. 3,700 years in the gap since Menes put the first capital on the map. Egypt was a mature state, sophisticated grand, before the dust storm of Al-Fustat touched the sand. Bridge the gap.